All right. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to the March meeting of the Delaware Astronomical Society. So first, do we have any new members like to introduce yourselves? Let me see if I can turn this around.
Oh, man,
Try my best.
No pressure.
No pressure. There we go.
Hey. Well, hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Ricardo Gomez. I'm a North Delaware resident, and I am extremely new to astrophotography and astronomy altogether. So I have a lot of questions and a lot to learn from you all. So thank you for welcoming me.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Anybody else? Yep, by all means, turn
My
that a
name is
little.
John, a neighbor told me about this club, so I'm here. It's interesting.
Fantastic.
Welcome.
Welcome. Anybody else?
Anyone online?
Bring that back around. All right, so then welcome to everybody. We got a few announcements before we get started with our wonderful speaker in a couple minutes. So first thing I'd like to let everybody know is that we've been working very hard to get the Solon and the pods and the telescopes all up and running. We're working on getting a bunch of new astrophotography cameras. We're working on getting the equipment easy to loan, easy to use, getting the access all set up so you'll be able to come out here and do some nice observing. And we're getting closer. We just received the camera yesterday, actually, and we just ordered a bunch of scope covers. They're going to be on their way shortly. And we're working on a bunch of other things. We're getting the equipment up and ready to go. I believe that we have a couple of announcements from different people. First thing, Sydney.
He's online.
Yep, he's online. You wanna...
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sydney Ocampo, and I'm the elections chair for Delaware Astronomical Society. Basically, I'm here to announce that we are open for nominees. Feel free to nominate yourself or somebody else you know would like to run, of course, for the because the positions that are open for this year for re-election are president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. Deadline for submission would be at the April members meeting. Basically the qualification is that if you're 16 years old or older and in good standing, feel free to email me at sidastronomy@yahoo.com. I'll chat this announcement later so that everybody can know, can have a better look. And that's pretty much it. And if you can provide a 200 or 500 word write-up, if you decide to nominate yourself. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rob.
Oh, thank you very much.
Cool.
Very nice.
And before we go, let me.
Quick?
Yeah, we just put these speakers in, and the sound's coming out of the projector.
Now my movie's gonna be real loud.
No,
Uh-oh. Is it off?
it's on, but it's coming out of the projector, isn't it?
Yeah, you may have to select it on the Zoom for it to come out, go on the microphone.
Zoom setting.
On the Zoom setting, the microphone icon, you may have to set it to the non-Epson.
There we go.
There you go.
Keep talking.
Sure.
There we go.
All right. All right. So feel free to nominate yourself or whoever you know.
Sandy? Very helpful.
Have a good evening.
Fred, you had an announcement real quick?
Yeah,
You wanna take this?
the Natural Lands, formerly the Natural Lands Trust, is once again having their Friday night lights. They haven't had one in over 2 years. It'll be July 8th. So there'll be a memo going out sometime probably in April, early May maybe, about the details. So just set the date aside if you intend on volunteering to help out there. Basically, for those who aren't familiar with Friday night lights, it's a pretty huge turnout at the Cheslin Preserve in Unionville, Pennsylvania. They usually have 2 bands there, about anywhere from 400 to 1,000 attendees. They have a separate area set up for telescopes where there may be as many as 30 or 40 of us there from various clubs. Usually it's DAS, it's the Chesapeake Astronomical Society and the Chester County Astronomical Society there, setting up their scopes for the between band breaks when the inebriated stumble on up the hill to come over and look through our telescopes. July 8th. So usually it starts at 8 o'clock, but usually they like us to get there at least a half hour and set up a half hour before showtime so that the guests who come in, they don't end up running over people with their telescopes.
Thank you. I'll rotate this back around. All right. Next, Bill, did you want to announce anything about the AP6?
Just the date. We're looking at Friday, April 22nd or Saturday, April 23rd, depending on the weather. Not sure if we'll have an outdoor or a Zoom meeting at this point. But the announcement will go out over groups.io.
Right. Yes.
Forgot something.
Oh, you forgot. All right, back over to Fred.
Back to Friday Night Light, what they also agreed to do, we're going to have a staffed table for a person to hand out masks for anybody coming in from the crowd to look through the scopes.
Take this background. And then Mary, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you want to announce with the book club?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'd like to remind you on Thursday, March 31st at 7 p.m. via Zoom, the book club will be meeting to discuss What Stars Are Made Of, The Life of Cecilia Payne-Koposhkin by Donovan Moore. Our Jim Kirshen will be leading the meeting. Donovan Moore, the author, will be joining us for our discussion. He'll be actually giving us a presentation. And we will also be joined by Cecilia Payne-Koposhkin's granddaughter, who is a professor at Dartmouth, Dr. Cecilia Koposhkin. So it should be a fantastic meeting. It's a wonderful book. If you have a library card in the states of Delaware or Pennsylvania, you can go to hoopla.com and you can download the audiobook. It's really terrific. Everybody's been greatly enjoying it. Very well written. We hope you join us.
Right. And if you guys don't know, Mary is our new librarian, in addition to being the leader of our book club. And she has been working very hard, very diligently on scanning in all the books, getting all the details in. She totally revamped the information up on the website. We have a fully digital catalog up there now with all kinds of details, and she's making a lot of progress on that. So thank you very much, Mary.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Rob. I've had wonderful help from Jim Kirshen and Robert Stack.
Fantastic.
We've got a great library team.
All right. I also wanted to announce that there's a Mount Cuba work day. I think it's the weekend after Easter, right? The 23rd, the Saturday the 23rd.
Hang
I
on.
was just gonna look
It
that
is
up.
late April.
23rd? 23rd, yes. April the 23rd. So at the work day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've absorbed my ego enough to purchase the reading glasses. I'm just not quite at the level to
Understood.
actually using them.
Understood.
Yeah, Tyrannosaurus arms on top of it.
All right, to let everybody know, lunch will be provided. You just have to come out with some shovels, come out ready to do some work, and we're gonna do mulching, we're gonna do planting and all kinds of things, whatever is needed.
Yeah, and you don't need to bring a shovel.
Yeah, we do have some.
Don't let that be a reason to not come.
Yeah, we do have some. We'll bring extras just in case you don't have them. And we're gonna get a lot of stuff done. It's nice to help out Mount Cuba because they host us all the time for all of our events, and we really appreciate that. So we give back whenever we can. Were there any other announcements?
Yes, I have one, Rob.
Right.
Hi, everybody. My name's Todd. I am the DAS education chair. And shortly after I was made this chairman and I had some plans, the COVID hit. Well, now COVID's winding down. I've got a request here from a parent at Hillendale Elementary School in Chadsford, Pennsylvania. They are planning a readathon for their third grade. This will be Friday, May the 20th. This year's theme is something about Harry Potter. I don't know if he's a Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't know, some Harry Potter thing. I don't know. They're having a series of rotational activities for the kids throughout the evening, focused on the Sorcerer's Stone. And as a way to end the evening, they wanted to host an astronomy tower where we had telescopes set up so the kids could stargaze. Now, they're third graders. I don't think it's going to be an actual tower, but I'll straighten that out later. We're just looking for volunteers. I put something out in the groups IO. I didn't hear anything back from anybody, but like I said, it'll be Friday, May the 20th. And it's going to start, at least they want us there at about 9:30. Now they're offering to pay for this, which is something I don't believe we charge for, but I would like to, suggest that they want to make a donation. It's up to them. She's just looking to put it in her budget. But if you are interested in helping out, maybe set up a telescope so the kids can look. please contact me. You can find my contact information on the website or TEEJ72 at Yahoo, and let me know and we'll make an evening of it.
Awesome. We have any other announcements? All right. All right, then without further ado, Jeff,
Yeah,
you want to take the next thing?
all right. Let me unpin Todd first.
Yep, we'll get out of your way.
Oh.
Then if you need help, I'll stay right here.
Yeah. All right. So before we start, I just wanted to make another mini announcement that ties into our presentation for tonight. So it is nice to be back in person again. As some of you may have noticed, either from the enhanced audio or our stumbling with the audio at the beginning, we now have enhanced audio in the room. There is an amplifier hiding under the desk and some really nice speakers. So we've upgraded from the little plastic computer speakers. As we are getting together, Zoom is still going to be an important part of the club. So having those speakers will be a big enhancement. Plus, if we have multimedia presentations or YouTube videos that we want to share, it'll make it a lot nicer. So thanks to Chris and Greg Lee for helping to make that happen. We also spent a lot of time kind of tidying up to make it a little bit neater and less trip hazardy. So again, continually making things better. So again, for tonight, we are joined by Professor Jason Wright of Penn State University. It's again exciting. I think, no, during the brief hiatus before Omicron, we had an actual outside speaker in person, but again, it's great to be with people virtually and in the room, and it's also nice to have speakers here. So appreciate Jason coming all the way down from Penn State. It is a little bit of a haul, so again, very, very much appreciated.
Definitely appreciate it.
Jason Wright is a professor at Penn State University, and he's going to be sharing with us today his work in SETI, or the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which at least I personally find to be a really, really fascinating topic. As it's sometimes hard to find intelligent life on Earth, we can all hope that there's some out there in the universe somewhere. Just a couple of logistics. Again, to keep the audio smooth, we will mute everybody that's on Zoom to allow the audio to come through clearly both directions. Logistical question for you, Jason. For questions, do you want to keep it loose and casual and have people interrupt, or would you rather them hold them to the end?
Interrupt, that's fine.
Okay, cool. As I'm not going to be, sometimes I say put the questions in the chat, but due to this nature, I'm not going to be monitoring it. So if you do have a question, by all means, temporarily unmute yourself. As a reminder in Zoom, if you're muted, if you hold down the space bar, it temporarily unmutes you. When you let go of the space bar, you're back to mute. That's probably the better way so that you don't forget to mute yourself again after you're done the question. Yep. By all means, jump in, interject questions, comments for Jason during the presentation. And Jason did agree, as always, the reminder, we are recording the session. And Jason had already mentioned he has no objection to us recording it and then eventually posting it on the YouTube channel.
Nice.
So with
Mute everybody first.
no further ado, is that here?
Participants.
Got it.
No, click here. And then you want to mute all. Yes. There you go.
And then Rob, I remember last time, we'll double check it. There was some other interesting settings that. No, I
You
think.
got to share the screen first.
Got it. That's the
You
issue.
haven't shared the screen yet. Click share screen. I would click. And then you want to click on the whole screen.
Which is this
I
one?
would click on that one, just in case.
Yeah. And then how did we get rid of this? There was a way we did that. That we got rid of this bar. Maybe just like that. And then we can do.
Yep.
Speaker view.
Yep, and that'll look lovely.
What?
Oh, it's.
Well, in the recording, it's nice to have this.
Yeah.
I see, okay.
And I guess why, hold on, why is it showing E and not us?
Because you pinned earlier.
Oh, did I?
You might have.
Let's see here. Maybe I'll just pin
Pin us.
us and then, there we
Now we're
go.
good. Now you're pinned.
Okay, again, we've only been doing Zoom for 2 years, we'll eventually get this figured out. So again, a big thanks, Jason Wright, welcome to the DAS.
Thank you.
It's all yours.
All right, thanks.
And obviously feel free to stand where you want. We can adjust the camera.
It's over and there's buttons here. Okay. So yes, thanks everybody. I'm gonna be addressing this question: is there intelligent life out there in the universe? And this thing at the top, the SETI Center, and we'll talk about at the end. But Penn State has what we call the Penn State Extraterrestrial Intelligence Center, which is really unique in the academic world as a hub where we can study this question that's supported by the college and by the university. Anyway, I'll talk about more about that at the end. But first, let's go back and sort of motivate some of what I'm going to talk about. So those of us who look for any kind of life out there in the universe, from slime on Mars to galaxy spanning super civilizations or whatnot, we all love this quote from one of the doctors of the Catholic Church, Albert the Great. Do there exist many worlds, or is there but a single world? This is one of the most noble and exalted questions in the study of nature. So we love this quote because it makes us sound very important. We feel very important with this here. This is one of the most exalted questions. Now, Albert was actually thinking about how many angels can fit on the head of a pin. He wasn't thinking actually about plurality of worlds and aliens. But still, we like this one because it shows that people have always wondered if we're alone or if there are other intelligences of the consciousnesses out there that we might be able to commune with in one way or another, be it religious or technological. Right, if I talk about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, I've given away the punchline on my next slide. What comes to mind for most people is perhaps this film. How many people have seen this movie? Just was on TV. Okay, so we have Contacts, Jodie Foster, listening with the headphones with her Wi-Fi on her laptop at VLA, which is a big no-no, because those things are super sensitive and you will blast them out if you have your Wi-Fi on at your laptop. There's no Wi-Fi out there.
It's the movies.
And it's the movies. And it was a great creative license. We all forgive, Jodie for the headphones and that. And everyone loves to take headphones that are not jacked into anything when they visit and get their picture with the headphones. What you might not know is that, so first of all, these are super sensitive. To give you a sense, this array, if you pointed it, if you've got your cell phone on, then, obviously it can detect your cell phone. If your cell phone's on Mars, it can detect your cell phone. Okay, so if there were cell phones on Mars, and we do have things on Mars with like the equivalent to cell phones, it's crawling with robots. It's the only planet we know of in the universe inhabited solely by robots. And we can detect their cell phones and their little directional antenna, and they send all of their data back. And that's how we know so much about Mars. And so that's the essence here, is that we really can detect technology across interstellar space with these radio telescopes. But this character, Ellie Arroway, is actually based on a real person. This is Jill Tarter, and she was the founding director of the SETI Institute. In the movie, the book Contact by Carl Sagan, the character Ellie Arroway is a composite of many people, but one of the primary people that it's based on is Jill Tarter, who has spent her entire career devoted to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. She's a real pioneer and a real symbol of the field. And so the movie is more or less true up to the part where, they actually detect alien life, and presumably the affair with Matt McConaughey. I mean, I don't know, maybe that. Anyway, as far as I know, that's also fictional. So where this whole field starts is in 1959, where two things happened. One is that a pair of astronomers, Cocconi and Morrison, what they showed was that humanity's radio transmission capabilities at the time, in 1959, were advanced enough in the post-war era with all these big transmitters, and their reception capabilities were advanced enough that they could actually detect each other at interstellar distances, not just on Mars, but at Alpha Centauri. And it was rough, it would be hard to do, but it was within engineering capabilities at the time that if you wanted to, you could send a signal between the two nearest stars with 1959 technology. And this was really catalytic for the field, this realization that we were capable of interstellar communication. And if we were capable of interstellar communication, if there was anyone else out there doing the same thing, then we were also capable of receiving their signals as well. And that really got everything started and got a lot of people's, intellectual juices flowing and thinking about how this would work. Now, at the same time, Frank Drake in 1960 announced what they called Project Ozma. So this was happening simultaneously. This was an independent realization of this. And Frank didn't just write a paper about it, he was actually doing it. Down in Green Bay, West Virginia, he actually conducted the first survey of nearby stars looking for radio signals around nearby stars. And he called it Project Ozma. Anyone know why it's called Project Ozma? does that name mean to you? Ozma. Does anyone know Ozma? Yes, Wizard of Oz from the second book, Princess Ozma is a character in Oz. And so he grew up with the Oz books, which are these travelogues where, you would go to these fantastic places and find all of these amazing creatures. You have the quadlings and the munchkins and all of these fantastic beasts that you would meet. And so it was like Gulliver's Travels or something like that. And so this was his inspiration, that out there in the universe, there were creatures to discover. And so he called it Project Ozma after Princess Ozma. And as an aside, since it just came up, does anyone know who Frank Drake's thesis advisor at Harvard was?
Chaplin?
It's not. We just mentioned this person.
Sagan.
It was Cecilia Payne was his thesis advisor at Harvard. So then he went on and did radio astronomy and did this. So in 1960s, Frank Drake begins Project Ozma, which is the first SETI program. It didn't have that name yet. That name would come later in the 80s at NASA. But it became a really frequent topic of big papers in Nature and Science magazine. This was serious science, and all sorts of people had ideas about how to do this. But it was the radio that captured the public imagination, both at the time and then later with the film Contact, which really boosted things a second time. So in the 1970s, NASA began its SETI program by that name, and it proposed an ambitious all-sky, all-frequency search for signals from space as part of its plan to explore the cosmos. This was really ambitious, and they asked what would a maximal program look like, and there was this big report called Project Cyclops that was issued on what this, if you were serious and you wanted to devote like national level resources to the project, what would it look like? And the price tag was huge. They weren't saying you should do that. It was just an exploration of the topic. But this made the program associated with huge amounts of government money on highly speculative science. And that was a bad place to be in the late 70s and 80s, when budget cutting and the deficit and pork were hot topics. And unfortunately, this attracted the attention of a budget cutter, Senator Bill Proxmire, who bestowed the program at NASA with a Golden Fleece Award for fleecing the American taxpayer with frivolous spending, even though it wasn't very much money. And he got a lot of press for this, and everybody laughed at it, and he got the project cut at NASA. But Carl Sagan was very persuasive. He was more popular than Senator Proxmire, and later, oh, by the way, Proxmire suggested the project be postponed until the federal budget is balanced and income and social security taxes are reduced to 0, or for a few million light years, whichever comes first. A light year is not a unit of time, of course, so this is just more ignorance being thrown out there, proving that he doesn't know what he's talking about. So Carl Sagan worked for years, and eventually, because he was working with Proxmire on issues of nuclear disarmament, and they were just learning about nuclear winter and what a strategic nuclear exchange would mean for life on Earth. And he, for his PhD, worked on these sorts of global climate simulations. So he was really a world expert in things like global warming. And he worked with Congress a lot on nuclear disarmament, including with Proxmire. And in those conversations, he managed to convince Proxmire that this was a mistake. Proxmire apologized and, revoked all of his opposition to SETI, and restored support at NASA for the program. And so NASA started again. They knew better than to attach a silly name to it. And so they called it Project Hermes, which is the high resolution microwave survey. They were doing high resolution observations in the microwave region of the radio spectrum and surveying all the stars. And there were many scientific applications for this. However, the joke in Congress was that it stood for "he really means SETI." So they kind of missed with that acronym, and they saw right through it, and they thought they were in the clear, but out of nowhere, Senator Richard Bryan of Nevada introduced a last-second amendment that no one saw coming right when things had to pass to end all SETI funding. And it had to pass because the budget had to pass, and that was it. NASA had learned its lesson and had been spanked twice for doing this, and NASA just refused to touch the topic after that. And Proxmire announced this hopefully will be the end of Martian hunting at the taxpayer's expense. And so this was just the perennial whipping boy. And it's been very challenging until very recently in 2018 to get NASA to even acknowledge that this is good science. So the field had to figure out what to do. And so it limped along for a while. And one of the authors of the Project Cyclops report was a founder of Hewlett Packard named Barney Oliver. And so he was both a SETI enthusiast, a scientist that had worked on it, and quite wealthy. And when he passed in '95, he left a substantial share of his estate to endow the project privately. And so the SETI Institute was founded, and Jill Tarter became the director of the SETI Institute, which still exists in Mountain View, California. And so as part of its ambition to fulfill the vision of Project Cyclops, they secured over $30 million from Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, for construction of a new telescope array now called the Allen Telescope Array. So that went along for about 10 years when it was put on hiatus. And it's just been very hard to find the sums of money you need to do a giant program like this without federal funds. Federal funds are at the level you need for a big ambitious project like this. And so there's this idea, partially perpetuated by the film Contact, that radio SETI, looking for these signals in space, is something we've been doing for decades. And why haven't we found anything? And the answer is because we haven't really been doing it for decades. There's been a little bit of searching. There's a partially finished array that's been underfunded. And so there's been a little bit of looking. But for the most part, it never really got started. Project Hermes lasted for months before it was shut down. And then, this project, they never quite finished the full array, and until it was fully operational, it wasn't really doing its job. So there's hardly been anything done since the 60s in this field in terms of actual searches in the radio, at least compared to the public perception. So something changed. Something changed in the 2010s. And to explain why, let's go back to Frank. And so here is Frank Drake, who in addition to starting Project Osmo, also wrote his eponymous equation down at Green Bay called the Drake equation. So the Drake equation was an attempt to justify the field, because people are like, why do you think you would ever find signals from space? Like, what are the chances that they just happen to be sending a signal our way? And Frank's a brilliant astronomer, and he wrote this equation down to sort of spur conversation and justify the field. And so what this equation has on the left is n, the number of signals there are to find. And on the right is an attempt to quantify what that number might be. So this isn't a formal calculation. We don't know what the things on the right are, but we can bound them. It's a way to think about them and at least convince yourself that this isn't a complete waste of time, and in fact, might have a very good chance of success. So the numbers on the right start with R star, that is the rate of star formation in the galaxy. That's how often stars are formed, and that's about one a year. There's about a star born every year somewhere in the galaxy. The galaxy has 100 billion stars in it right now. It's been around for 10 billion years, so these grew more in the past. But these days, they're formed at about a rate of 1 a year. The next is the fraction of those stars that have planets. And when he wrote this equation down, they did not know what this number was. It could have been 0. I mean, we're here, but it could have been infinitesimally small. We could have been the only system. We just did not know if there were planets or not. And there was a popular argument at the time that many other stars must have planets based on their rotation rates. It was a brilliant argument. It's widely accepted. It's completely wrong. But based on that argument, they argued that the fraction of stars with planets is probably around 1, and that is correct. So they had the right answer for completely the wrong reason, but that's okay. So most stars in the galaxy have planets. The next one, N sub E, is...
So you said 1%?
No, 1, not 1%. 1, unity, 100%.
Yeah, okay,
100%.
Right.
So the next one is the number of planets like Earth that can have life on them among those stars that do have planets. Now, in the solar system, this number is debatable, but certainly at least 1, because we've got Earth. But there might have been life on Mars. There might have been a civilization on Mars a billion years ago. There might be life on Europa. And so we debate like what n is supposed to be even for the solar system. But let's say it's 1 for the solar system. What is it for other star systems? And this has been the focus of a lot of work at NASA for the last couple of decades. And we think we finally more or less have the answer on what this is. And we think that the product of these two numbers is something like a quarter. That is, there are a lot of rocky planets out there. A lot of them are at the distance from the star where they could have water on the surface. Now, I can't point to a star and say there's a planet with water on its surface around that star, not even one. But there are a few where we are pretty sure there's something kind of the mass of Earth that is the right temperature for water. And based on the fact that we found a few, given how many we've looked at, we can come to the conclusion that something like 1 in 4 systems probably has a planet like that. So when you multiply by all the planets in the galaxy, all the stars in the galaxy, we're starting to talk big numbers. The next ones are the fraction of those planets where life arises, and there, who knows? It could be quite large. They argue the number's near 1. Why? Because the oldest minerals we know of on Earth show hints that life was around at that time, which means life formed really fast. As soon as there was water on Earth, it seems like life rose right away. It didn't take 2 billion years before life finally happened. It wasn't this long, slow process. It was bang. And the fact that it happened so quickly, to many people, argues that it's an inevitable byproduct of the conditions of early Earth. And so it should be ubiquitous in the galaxy. The one after that is the fraction of those planets that give rise to intelligent life, or at least technological life. And some people think that's very low, but if you think about it, intelligence has arisen on Earth many times. We are not the only intelligent species on the Earth even today. Everything that makes us unique, all those qualities that let us be what we are, exist elsewhere. Almost all of them exist elsewhere in the animal kingdom. Other social animals, other communicative animals, other animals with self-awareness, other animals that use tools. All those things are out there. We're just the only species that has them all in one spot. They're distributed elsewhere, and not any species has them. Even the octopus is an intelligent tool-using creature. It's just not a social animal, and it doesn't teach. It's all instinct. And if it were social and could teach its young, you know, they'd be the ones with radio telescopes. And so then there's some fraction of them that are communicating. And then there's a duration of time that they communicate. You put that all together, you get some number. And the main point is that this R star, the number that you're getting every year, is a big number. There's 100 billion stars in the galaxy. So even if you think the other ones are all small, planets is 1, number of planets per star is roughly 1, fraction of life, if you think that's near 1, those other ones got to be super tiny, or the galaxy is filled with communicative species. And that's enough to justify the search. Maybe there's nothing to find, but you're not wasting your time by looking, and that's the point. And so a lot of that argument comes from this, how many stars have planets? And so the way NASA went about establishing this number was with the Kepler Space Telescope, which this is my day job. I look for exoplanets around other stars. And one of the ways we do that is by watching when they pass in front of the star. And not all planets do this. Most have just random orbits on the sky, but some have orbits such that they just happen to pass in front of their stars. Not very common, a few percent. But when they do, and they go in front of the star gets dimmer, not that dimmer, that's exaggerated. It's like a 1% or 1% dimmer. Can't do it from the ground unless it's a giant planet, but from space, you can detect these very small blips. And if the planet's about right for liquid water, it'll take about a year to go around. So if you stare for 5 years, it'll go around 5 times and you'll see 5 little tiny blips. And you got to find those 5 little blips. It was extremely challenging. But the Kepler Space Telescope was up to the job. It stared at the same spot of the sky in Cygnus for 5 years, and it looked at 100,000 stars. And it tried to find this. And we found enough of them, sort of like the Earth, that we are confident that the galaxy is filled with billions, tens of billions, probably hundreds of billions of planets like the Earth, even though we haven't really found that one yet that we can be confident. That's what the next generation of space telescopes is for. So this Kepler Space Telescope had searched over 100,000 stars for these events to establish this fact. And having established that fact has really helped invigorate the field of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. But before I do that, I want to take a digression because it's a lot of fun. I do see we have someone in the chat. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you have a question, please just yell at me. So we've established that all these stars have planets oriented every which way. This is the universe we live in, and that even more justifies this whole field. And so part of what that did is it re-inspired people to reinvest in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so in 2015, Yuri Milner, who is a Silicon Valley billionaire, lives in California, announced that he was going to put $100 million into this project. And in fact, it's an open-ended commitment. He has not promised he'll stop at 100 million. He loves this project, and since then, he has agreed to just keep funding it. Every time the team says we want to go another 3 years, he says, awesome, go bigger. So it's been fantastic. So this is called the Breakthrough Listen Initiative. He got Stephen Hawking on board to help him with the big announcement, which is a great way to get lots of press. And it's completely reinvigorated the field. And so now the Allen Telescope Array is going, although that's separately funded, that's not part of this. And they've been using the Green Bank Observatory, which is where Frank Drake did his first work, and observatories all over the world to actually accomplish what much of the public thinks we've been doing for decades. So here is Yuri at the announcement with Stephen Hawking. There's the Astronomer Royal, Martin Rees, and Frank. They're on the right, very pleased to see that this is finally happening. So let's take a brief digression about different kinds of SETI. So I said, radio SETI seems like a good idea, but it inspired all of these other ideas. And radio astronomy has captured the public imagination. It's captured the philanthropist's imagination. But other ideas were also around and have been pursued at an even lower level than radio SETI since then. So here's this original paper by Cocconi and Morrison in 1959. In 1961, Schwartz and Charlie Towns, inventor of the laser Nobel laureate, wrote a paper about optical masers. So he invented the microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, which was a radio version of a laser. And they didn't have the word laser yet. They called them optical masers, and they were kind of hypothetical. He had just sort of established it could kind of happen. And he said, but I'm pretty sure we'll be able to figure out the laser thing really soon, which he did. And that they work even better for communicating among the stars than radio waves. And in fact, when we communicate around Earth, we use both. We use Wi-Fi and the microwave. But then when we go to fiber optics, we use light down fiber optic cables. If you don't have a fiber optic cable, but you do have point-to-point sight, then lasers are what you want to use. And they're extremely efficient and very high bandwidth. And so he argued you should use laser SETI and not radio SETI. And until recently, hardly anyone had really tried. And in the last few decades, that's been a project at Harvard and UC San Diego. And then, that kind of ended up in a weird spot. Another project by Ron Bracewell in 1960 was, no, you shouldn't be sending photons. That's terrible bandwidth, because yes, you can detect a signal, but it's extremely low bandwidth. And it's horrible latency anyway, because it takes years and years before your signal gets there. If you're going to wait years for the signal to go just to send, a few gigabytes or something, why not just wait a lot longer? You're already waiting a long time. Wait 100,000 years and send a physical object. And now you can send basically arbitrary amounts of data. The bandwidth of sending physical objects is much higher, even though the latency is lower. And so he argued we should be looking in the solar system for probes and artifacts and doing short-range communication with them. And that's how you would communicate. And so this is a field that only very recently has had any respectability. All the face on Mars nonsense, the pyramids on the moon, just completely ruined this line of thought, and no one would touch it until very recently. But it's actually a really good idea, and it's something we can do. But the one I want to talk about is by Freeman Dyson. So Freeman Dyson was a polymath, just an amazing physicist that did everything and contributed to so many parts of science. I did have the privilege of meeting him until before he died just a few years ago. But in 1960, he published what might be his most famous paper, which is ridiculous given all of the incredible groundbreaking papers he published in his career. He heard everyone talking about communication and all this stuff. And he's like, look, all of that requires this intentionality that they care about us and are trying to get our attention. And that bothered him. He said, what do they do that you would notice even if they didn't care about you? And his point was that any very large industrious species is going to use a lot of energy. And how much energy could you use? And so he wanted to know what the limits were. So what he asked limits the amount of energy that, for instance, humans could use. And the only thing he could find was the sun only puts out so much energy. And after that, you're kind of sunk. There's no more energy to get. Because what he showed is that there's enough mass in the solar system if you wanted to deconstruct a planet. And he wrote a whole paper on how there's no physical reason you can't. It's just hard. But if you deconstructed Jupiter for parts, you could then build as much living surface as you wanted in the solar system, enough to capture all of the sunlight that the sun puts out. What's interesting about doing such a thing is that if you were to continually increase your energy consumption, and humanity's energy consumption grows exponentially, it's still growing exponentially. He said, there's no reason you're going to hit a limit. You can just put your solar panels and computers in space, and you can grow as much as you like. You might use all of the energy generated by your star. In that case, you would notice, if you capture and use all the energy coming out of a star, that is very noticeable. So first of all, the energy is not leaving the star. It's being used by the stuff around the star. And secondly, you can't destroy the energy. You have to get rid of it. When my computer or this computer pulls in energy from the wall and uses it up, the energy's still there. And if it doesn't get rid of that energy, it's going to melt, which is why it has a fan and it blows the energy out as heat when it's done with it. Heat is used up energy. It's like computer poop. And so when you use all of this sunlight, eventually you have to dump it out as heat. And so he said this would be super obvious. And he calculated you could see it across the galaxy. If a star had that much energy being consumed, you would easily notice it from infrared heat radiation coming off of the technology. And so these are some fanciful, I just Googled Dyson Sphere and looked it up. These are some fanciful ideas of what a Dyson Sphere might look like. These have no basis in physics. They are all ludicrous, but are very, very pretty. Now, I've never seen a Dyson Sphere, so I can't actually tell you what they're like, but it turns out I have an expert on Dyson Spheres who can tell you all about it. Okay, so
There's a little X.
okay, so everything about that's wrong. I've never seen one, but I can promise you everything about that was wrong. You can't build a giant hollow sphere. It doesn't make any sense. It would completely fall apart. Live on the inside of the surface, that maybe you would fall. Because, I mean, Star Trek has artificial gravity, so okay, fine. They have artificial gravity, whatever. They've got gravimetric interference or something that means that, but this thing would be radiating infrared radiation. This would be visible across the galaxy in its infrared waste heat. But gravitum babble, they can't find it. Okay, so anyway, all that's wrong. What we're really talking about would just be, think solar panels. Like we've already started building our Dyson Sphere. We have all of these spacecraft that are powered by sunlight with these big, solar panels. And the more we launch, the more solar panels are out there. And, just imagine, deconstruct an asteroid, more solar panels, take apart Jupiter, more solar panels, and eventually you've got all of it. And so think of like a swarm of gnats around the sun, not the solid sphere. This is the episode where they pick up Scotty. James Doohan shows up in it. It's a really good episode. How do I go to the next one? How do I
Page down, maybe? Or click on the side.
I'll go this button over here.
There we go.
All right, there's the inside of our Dyson Sphere relics, season 6, episode 4. So here they fly in and there's all these continents on the inside surface, which makes no sense, but that's all right. That's all right. It's a great episode. And Riker is a Penn State alumnus, by the way. One of our, buddies. So what are you going to do to find these? Well, you think about the swarm of gnats, and if there's a light bulb with a swarm of gnats around it, you would notice the gnats, because when they go in front of the light bulb, it gets dimmer. Remember, like the transits, which means that even though NASA won't talk about SETI, they launched a Dyson Sphere hunter for us and stared at 100,000 stars looking for things going around the stars. They were not amused when I pointed this out. But it means that you could find stuff. And so actually the person who pointed this out wasn't me. It was a guy named Luke Arnold, who before Kepler launched, showed that Kepler would be able to tell the difference between a planet going in front of the star and something shaped not a circle. So he picked a triangle, not because solar panels, aliens build triangular spaceships, but because it's not a circle. He just wanted something other than a circle to demonstrate that Kepler could tell the difference, which isn't obvious. But in this paper, he showed that it could tell the difference between all sorts of interesting shapes. He imagined louvers, they could like flash at us and send signals, whatever. But the point is, if there's big things orbiting a star, Kepler could detect them and notice that they were not circles. And so he had all sorts of ideas about that. And of course, if Kepler had discovered a Dyson sphere, you would have heard about it, and I wouldn't talk about, a different title to the talk, right? So obviously Kepler didn't find anything like that, right? Well, no, kind of. So here's one thing Kepler found. This oddball, something's going around every 3 days or something, or it's 8 hours or something like that. But it's not the same size every time. It keeps changing its size. Like sometimes it blocks 0.5% of starlight, and sometimes it blocks 1.5% of starlight. And every time it goes around, it's different. So is this really one object? Or is this like lots of objects with different sizes? Or maybe it's an object that's thin and it's changing its aspect every time it goes around. This was very, very strange. Also, it's not round. Because the shape here, remember the shape was kind of symmetric for the transit? This is not symmetric. This, in fact, is kind of shaped like a long triangle. That's weird. All right, so I won't leave you in suspense.
Consistently like that?
Yeah, it's hard to say because you can't get a shape from an individual transit, you have to stack.
Oh, okay.
But that stack is consistent. So it's sort of a triangle. This is the best guess.
Jason, there's a pointer if you'd like. It might be hiding back there.
Is there
A big wooden stick. Oh, wait.
Yeah, my analog laser pointer.
No, I think I hit it. Where did I put it? I cleaned up so well that I hit everything. Hang
All
on.
right, I can point. Sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Here, you see.
Oh, there it is.
Analog laser pointer. Thank you. Okay. Pointy head and then a big fan tail. It's an evaporating planet. So this planet is so close to the star that the rock is literally evaporating off of the surface and recondensing in a cometary tail behind it. We don't know why the tail is sometimes big and sometimes not. I think this is an underappreciated problem, and we asked to point the James Webb Space Telescope at some, not this one, but one very like it, to see if it really is a cometary tail and see what it's made of. We just missed the cut, but we're going to resubmit next cycle. I think we're going to get it. Anyway, we think that's what it is, which is amazing. And it's just one lesson that when you go looking for weird things like Dyson spheres, you find things you weren't expecting that are really interesting in their own right. And so this is great because it means it's not just, oh, we didn't find anything, we didn't find anything, we didn't find anything. It's like we found an evaporating planet and we can chemically study its interior, which we can't even do for Earth, really. So that's pretty amazing. Okay, but there was a bigger weirdo. So we can't look at all the Kepler data. It's 5 years of data on 100,000 stars. And so we used NASA, wrote algorithms to find planets. And all the algorithms know how to do is find planets. But we're looking for things that aren't planets. And so the algorithms just miss them. Now there are weird planets and weird stars. And so there's a project called Zooniverse. Has anyone done a Zooniverse project, by the way? Homework. Zooniverse.com or whatever. Zooniverse, Google it. It's citizen science. These are projects in astronomy and beyond that there's no algorithm that can look through all the data. And so you can participate. What they need are just people to look at data with their eyeballs and say, that's weird. What's that? Okay, anyway, and so lots of amazing discoveries have been made by citizen scientists just sifting through all of these data. And then
so it's like a SETI like the SETI at home.
It's like SETI at home, but it's not your computer screensaver.
Okay.
This is you and your eyeballs, click, 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 click. What is that weird thing that all the NASA algorithms missed because they weren't looking for it?
Gotcha.
Is it more than galaxies?
Galaxy Zoo was one of the very first Zooniverse projects. Absolutely. That's right. And so they found the red spirals and all of these other weird things that no one knew existed. So this is a chat thing where the citizen scientists are talking about the weird things that they observe. And this is a little meme they posted of what he feels like staring at this bizarre star that Kepler looked at that didn't have a planet around it, and why he's so upset. And this is the original post where they realized they had something truly bizarre. Was this? So I'm going to give you some kind of explain. So this is 4 different times it was staring at this particular star. On the x-axis is time in days, and sometimes they're stretched and sometimes they're not. But we'll look at this one. So every tick mark here is 5 days. Relative flux, the star is supposed to be at 1, but sometimes it's a little dimmer. And so what we're looking for is it's flat, and then that nice symmetric bowl shape, and then it keeps going because that means planet. And the NASA algorithms just went, this is boring, this is not planets. But like, it's changed, like there's this thing that goes in front of it, and it's not a planet, and then something else goes in front, and then something else, and then something else, and it's like 1% dimmer. That's like the size of Jupiter. Whatever made this dip is the size of Jupiter, and it's not round. And then later there's this like, oh, it got dimmer, and then it got dimmer again, and then brighter. That's not round. That's some very weird shape. And then the scale here, this is 5 days, 10 days. Over the course of 10 days, it just started getting dimmer. 1% dimmer, 2% dimmer, 3%, 5% dimmer. You're now twice the size of Jupiter, whatever's blocking the starlight. 15% dimmer. That's the size of a small star. And then it snapped back up. So it's not round at all. This thing is long. And then it didn't quite recover. It kind of took a long time. This is some very strange shape. And then around day 1500, all these things started going in front of the star. A big one, a small one, a small one, a huge one, a quick one, a slow one. They're all stacked on top of each other in this extremely complex light curve. And then Kepler lost its reaction wheel and couldn't point anymore. This is a very, very strange object. And we don't really understand what it is. So the citizen scientists brought it to the attention of the astronomer on call, who was a postdoctoral scholar at Yale named Tabitha Boyajian. We all know her as Tabby. And she visited Penn State and showed me this light curve. And she said, do you have any ideas? Because I've been working on this for 2 years and we still can't figure out what is going on. And I said, I don't have any good ideas about what that thing is, but I have one idea you're going to hate. So she wrote it up, and I'm not a co-author on it, and she did not include my idea because we were doing this separately. And her idea, the scenario most consistent with the data in hand is the passage of a family of exocomet fragments, all of which associated with a single previous breakup event, and they want more observations to figure it out. So a huge family of hundreds and hundreds of comets. Exo just means they're not around the sun, they're around this star instead.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, comets aren't the size of Jupiter. This is like take Pluto and throw it at the sun and get it so close it gets an enormous tail. Hundreds of those. No one thought such a thing should happen. And until we saw this star, it would have been absurd to suggest such a thing. But it does explain the data really well. So that's what, yeah, anyway, everyone had a certain question we kept asking and looking at the data, and on the whole team, I mean, I'm not on the team, but everyone kept saying the same thing. And they cleaned it up slightly in the title of the paper where they call it the Where's the Flux star, the WTF star. But around our lab, when we were talking about it, they didn't have that name yet, and this phone number we just never bothered to memorize. And so we just called it Tabby Star, because it was the one that she showed us. So this got a little bit of traction. New scientists picked it up, giant cloud of comets. The public went, okay, that's interesting, whatever. But Tabby and I were interested in the idea that it might be a Dyson Sphere. And so we had heard about the work at Berkeley, using these big telescopes to do search for extraterrestrial intelligence stuff. They had just gotten Yuri Milner to build them this gigantic computer that could do a better job than anyone. We said, how do you look for radio signals? They said, great, we'll get some time. We asked for some time, and they did not give us the time to use the giant telescope of the owners of the telescope at Green Bank. This is the 100-meter. We teamed up. Here's Andrew Simeon, the director of the Berkeley SETI Research Center. We asked for public national time to go look at this, and they didn't think it was that interesting, and so we did not get the time. However, Andrew was testifying before Congress about why they should fund SETI again, and talked to a reporter at the Atlantic over dinner. And here's the reporter, Ross Anderson. Last night I had dinner with the director of Berkeley SETI Research Center. We had a talk, he wrote an article. One of the questions he asked Andrew was, are there any targets like you're actually excited about that are like really cool? He said, oh, there's this cool star that Kepler found. And then my life got weird. So he wrote this article in the Atlantic, the most mysterious star in our galaxy. It's a brilliant article. I love this article. He's such a good writer. The pull quote was from me. I blurted out on the phone. It looked like the kind of thing you might expect an alien civilization to build, which is fair, but it's also a good way to get like people really excited about the star. And I didn't realize how dangerous that could be. Here's BuzzFeed's take on the whole thing. Have scientists really found an alien megastructure around a distant star? Now, does anyone know, I think it's Bettridge's rule of newspaper headlines. If it ends in a question mark, the answer is no. Ironclad law of newspaper headline writing. Try it. Anyway, but it's a good way to like suggest that we found aliens. Now, you know, all we do is ask for some telescope time. We haven't published a paper. We haven't told our colleagues about it. We just thought it would be worth checking just to make sure. And this went viral, as they say. It was on the Late Show, and Neil deGrasse Tyson here with Seth MacFarlane, who did like Family Guy and the Cosmos series. So they're buddies, and they were on, and so it was a really weird time in my professional career because journalists are calling up my colleagues and saying, Jason Wright says he found an alien megastructure around this star. Can I get a quote? And like, what are they going to think? I hadn't published a paper. It was challenging. But we had to therefore study it and prove it wasn't aliens to like salvage reputations. So one thing we wanted to see is it giving off all that infrared heat that Freeman Dyson said it must? So we checked and checked and checked, and we can't find it. And we asked to point the James Webb Space Telescope to try and find this infrared flux. And we also didn't get that time, but we're going to try again. I think we'll get it next time. Because whatever's blocking, even giant comets have to give the heat off. You know, this isn't a test for aliens. This is just a test that whatever's blocking the light is actually orbiting the star.
As opposed to
maybe between us and the star in interstellar space. I like that idea a lot, actually.
periodic though?
It wasn't periodic.
Oh, okay.
It might, they think they may have established periodicities, but it's pretty weak. I still think a dark horse candidate is that there's something between us and the star, like a disk of material around a dark object, like a black hole, could be in between. It's unlikely, but it's actually predicted by theory it should happen eventually. It's just, you should have to look at like 10 million stars before you find one, not 100,000. So it seems unlikely, but those numbers are fuzzy. Anyway, that's an alternative. It led to a lot of things on why it's so hard for us to discuss this possibility. And this gets back to why we don't look for things in the solar system, because people think face on Mars nonsense and you lose credibility. It's so hard to bring this topic up without it ending up on Saturday Night Live and like it just being this big thing. And so it's challenging. And so that's part of the difficulty of working on this, is proving that you're doing good work and that you're not just claiming aliens and every weird thing that's out there. Here's the Allen Telescope Array. They pointed and did not find any radio waves coming from it, which is not surprising because they would have to be directed at us at extremely strong. And at just the frequency we looked at transmitted when we happened to be looking at the modulation and bandwidth that we had tuned the telescope for. But the fact that we didn't see that convinced tons of people it wasn't aliens, and that kind of killed all the media attention. So I was pleased with that.
Well, I'm trying to think, what's the time scale between light signals and sound signals? Pretty big, right?
Well, no sound signals through space.
Oh, I'm sorry. Radio signals, okay.
But the radio and the light is the same speed.
Yeah.
So it would have been the same time. And so, right. So these things that we didn't see any of that stuff led. So then we did a study and we actually crowdfunded, getting back to citizen science, we kickstarted money to get private telescope time to catch it dipping again. And it happened. We actually finally got data from it. And so I worked with Tabby and a postdoc named Eva Bodman and some other people, and we showed that whatever was blocking the starlight was dust. It was effluents from something and not solid objects. And so that proves comets are a pretty good idea. And so Tabby's probably right. I still like the black hole disk thing, but anyway, we'll try to figure it out. But it's probably comets, and her original conclusion, I think, is sound. So with that little diversion about Kepler and this and that, and my adventures getting into this field, we then, NASA started feeling like it needed to work on this again. All these planets, people were saying, why don't you look for intelligent life? So in 2018, NASA put together a workshop on the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And we got all these experts together to work on it. Now, what's important to note is that all of these experts in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the people that actually look for aliens full time are actually maybe no one here. A few people work on it part time. Shelley Wright does laser SETI part time. Andrew Simeon does radio full time, and there's a couple other people that work with Andrew full time, and that's about it, because it's a very small field. But everyone here was interested in the topic, and we made a big report for NASA, and we wrote it, and this is what NASA can do to search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And it's not just radio, it's all those other ideas as well. And since then, it's gotten a lot easier to work on this, and NASA has actually started funding a few small projects through grants programs. So the punchline I missed there, because I can't see ahead, is that if you did take all the people that work full-time on SETI, Jill Tarter likes to say you could fit them in a phone booth. And if you're creative with your phone booth packing, that's about right. So the number of full-time equivalent people working on SETI would fit in a phone booth if you're in a prankster mood. To illustrate that, here's an actual meeting, not organized by NASA, of people who really do think about SETI a lot, including Frank Drake and including Jill Tarter. And this is a big SETI meeting. And even that here, most of these people don't work on it full time. There's only a few. Frank's retired, Jill is retired at this point. Dan Wertheimer is still working on it. And so these meetings are not big because it's a very small community. And the reason for that is the way that we train people is with government money. There's no government money to work on it. Here are all of the people who have actually earned a PhD in this field, looking for SETI since 1960. The first person to get a PhD in the field was in 1998, 38 years after it was founded. And most of these people, 2, 3, and 4, these 4 all did it with lasers, working with Paul Horowitz at Harvard. If there's any electrical engineers, Paul Horowitz, Art of Electronics. He graduated all 4 of them doing optical laser SETI. Andrew Simeon in radio SETI, and then he trained Amelia, who recently graduated, and Penn State's own Sophia Shake, who I graduated. So you can see there's an acceleration here, right? Like things are picking up since that, around the time of that 2018 workshop. But that's it. And this is not a lot for 62 years of work. So that's what we're trying to do at Penn State. We're trying to change that. Sophia is our first graduate of our program at the Penn State Extraterrestrial Intelligence Center. One of the reasons we want to do it at Penn State is that we have a really big astronomy department that's very broad. We have the highest cited astronomy faculty in the world by some metrics. We have multiple journal editors of the American Astronomical Society journals. We teach more astronomy to undergraduates than any institution in the world. We are the hub for multiple NASA missions, especially the NASA Swift satellite. And we have an astrobiology dual title PhD program where people in biology or chemistry or geochemistry or geophysics or molecular biology can get their PhD in that and astrobiology. And while they're doing that, they can be trained in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so that's why we're able to produce these PhDs. So our astrobiology students do cool things like go caving in Italy and doing life detection experiments on Earth and designing life detection experiments like that for other planets like this one from one of the robot denizens of our nearest planetary neighbor, I guess second nearest. We also have what we call the Consortium for Planetary and Exoplanetary Sciences and Technology. So that encompasses our old Astrobiology Research Center, which NASA has been funding for decades. We have the Center for Exoplanets and Habitable Worlds, which has been around for 12 or 13 years now, where we find all of these exoplanets. We've just started up, I don't have a logo yet, for the Center for Planetary System Science so that we can study the solar system. And I'm excited to look for things in the solar system, which has basically never been done before in terms of technology, and our very own Penn State Extraterrestrial Intelligence Center. And so with these four centers together, we think we can really make an impact and explore all of the different parts of the field. One of the best parts about this is that we get to actually turn it into an academic discipline. There's no SETI textbook, like there's no canon of literature. We don't even agree on what the terms in the field mean. And the reason is that with no government funding, universities don't have funding to train students. So it all happened at the SETI Institute, which is not a university and doesn't teach. I mean, they do outreach, but they don't teach graduate students and train PhD students there. And so at Penn State, we have a graduate course where we actually teach things like the Drake equation and the whole field, and we define the canon. So our graduates really understand the field. And one of the cool things we get to do is go where it all started. Here we are at Green Bank, where Project Osma started. The Project Osma telescope is behind those trees. And these are the students from two of our classes, we've had three now, that use the 100-meter telescope to actually conduct novel SETI experiments. And so we did this in 2018, we did this in 2020, and we'll do it again this year. We've done an undergraduate class, and we're publishing papers. There's so much to do in this field that these students have published a bunch of papers already, and we're gonna, in this next year, we're gonna publish 3 more. We couldn't do it over Zoom, so here are our students from the class on Zoom, working with Breakthrough Listen team member here, Steve Croft, to run remotely that 100-meter telescope from our rooms and stuff. And here's all the schematics of the data coming in as we study our target. And then the undergraduate course that we just finished this last fall. And that was very cool. So here we are in the Drake Lounge, and this is where the Drake equation got written down. And if you're ever in Green Bank or near Green Bank, West Virginia, stop by, ask to see the Drake Lounge or get the tour. And there's a plaque there commemorating when he wrote down that famous eponymous equation. So here are some of the students. Here's Sophia, who just graduated. She is now at the SETI Institute as an NSF postdoc. The National Science Foundation is funding her to work on this. And then here are 3 more students that we have trained. These 2 will have a significant portion of their PhD dedicated to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So they will be numbers 11 and 12 if they choose to make it a significant part of the thesis. And then the last reason it's so cool to do this is that we want to keep expanding our horizons. I named the 4 ways to look for extraterrestrial intelligence. They were all from the 60s. Since then, I count 1 really novel idea that they just did not think of in the 60s. It wasn't until more recently, which is that NASA is trying to study the atmospheres of exoplanets to look for biosignatures, signs of the atmosphere like ozone and methane and things that life produces. But what if they see CFCs? Nature doesn't make chlorofluorocarbons. What if they see unnatural levels of NOxes and nitrous oxides and things like we use for fertilizer and for combustion engines? We haven't really thought about that yet. Like, could we detect things that way? And so there are a pair of papers that recently came out in a collaboration I'm in looking at CFCs and NOxes, showing that in principle, the James Webb Space Telescope in optimal circumstances might be able to actually detect artificial gases. And that might be how we actually discover them, from the pollution. And you think, why? What an advanced ancient civilization. Like, surely they've moved beyond polluting their atmosphere. And fair enough, but who said it's their home planet? I mean, Mars doesn't have, as far as we know, any life on it. We've got all these robots crawling around. Think in the distant future, it's not going to have a biosphere, even if we're living there. Terraforming is very hard. Who cares if we pollute it? There's no harm. And so potentially we might find one of these planets that doesn't have a biosphere, and so the technosphere can just dump all the pollutants at once. Why not? Who knows? Who knows? And the point isn't that's what they would do. The point is we should look and find out. And then the last reason Penn State's great for this is that we're the hub of the Astronomy Multi-Messenger Observatory Network. Because who's to say what this technology they use might do? Why would they use photons? Maybe they'll use neutrinos. It seems like a bad idea to me, but I don't have access to their technology. You know, I'm sure radio waves seem silly to people in the past. Maybe they'll use gravitational waves. We now have gravitational wave detectors in Louisiana and Washington and in India and in Italy. And or cosmic rays. You can send particles through space at high energies, and we can detect those with observatories around the world through shrink-off radiation and other particle showers and things like that. So these are the four fundamental forces of nature. We're pretty sure that's complete. And so those are the four ways we might detect them. And only at Penn State do we connect all the observatories together to try and do what we call multi-messenger astronomy from the four ways that the universe tries to talk to us. So I'm excited because we're just getting started. We're just filled with ideas, and we have a lot of eager students who want to explore those ideas, which is why when we teach these classes, I can say, go explore that idea, and they'll do it for a final project, and then we'll submit it to the Astronomical Journal, and it's great because no one's ever thought of it before. It's a lot of fun. So that's what we're doing at Penn State. I don't think I can this blah, blah, blah. There we go. That's what I want. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so certainly welcome any questions, both from the people here as well as Zoom. Again, a reminder, please, unmute yourself and maybe we can see what popped up in the chat. Oh,
well, I comment on the Fermi paradox, the puzzle, the absence of alien contact. So the Fermi paradox of conflict with the clear absence is very good. So this is a great example of why we need an academic a study of all of this. So the Fermi paradox is a foundational concept in SETI. Maybe you've heard of it. But everyone gets it wrong because it doesn't actually exist because Fermi didn't actually pose it. So it's not Fermi's and it's not a paradox. And no one can really agree on what it says. It's just this like folklore that kind of organically arose. And there are books on exactly how this happened. But the best description of what the Fermi paradox says is that Enrico Fermi wanted to know why there weren't aliens on Earth today. That's what he wanted to know. That's what he was trying to figure out. Because the universe, the galaxy is not that big compared to its age. So what do I mean by that? I mean that there's been enough time, if you've got even chemical rockets like we do, there's been enough time with rockets like those to explore the whole galaxy many times over. So if anyone in the history of the galaxy has ever built chemical rockets, then they could have explored the whole galaxy, just like we can crisscross the Earth. Like there's no part of the Earth that humans haven't at least flown over. And so he's like, they've had so much time. Why aren't they here today on Earth? Why can't we see them? That's the original Fermi paradox. Most times you see it mentioned in the literature, though, people are like, well, you guys have been looking for radio signals for so long and haven't found anything, which means they're not sending out radio signals. So where is everybody? This is not what Fermi meant. And also, we haven't been looking that long. So it's not actually any kind of conundrum. As for why they aren't here on Earth today, you can think of a ton of reasons, but just to extend the Earth analogy, if you went to a random spot on Earth, you would not find any people. People occupy a very small fraction of the Earth. Even if you say, okay, but Earth technology, same. Go to a random spot on Earth, most of it's ocean, so the nearest Earth technology is thousands of miles away. But even on land, like you look around, you'd be lucky to land in a city. You're probably out in the middle of nowhere. And there might be a road within, 10 miles, but it's not where you are and you can't see it. So I don't think it's that weird that we can just look around briefly and not see them, right? If you're swimming in the ocean, random part of the ocean and look around, you're probably not going to see a fish. But the fish have been everywhere in the ocean. So I think that's my solution to the paradox and why it fails. So the question, what was the question? Will I be commenting? Yes, I will be commenting on it.
Is the focus pretty much restricted to our galaxy?
It doesn't have to be.
I imagine it's, tons harder
Well, this is the problem, right? The farther away it is, the harder it is to look. So in the
Yeah.
solar system, we can look for little things, right? I mean, we can look for, lost cities on Mars, right? We can look for free floating probes like satellites that are around the Earth, the sun, and we've done that. Nearby stars, it's much harder. We can look for radio signals if they're strong, and Dyson spheres. We can see Dyson spheres across the galaxy, but go to a distant galaxy, you're like, gosh, that's a really powerful radio transmitter. You can do it though. The amount of energy you need is very large, but if you've got a Dyson sphere, then you've got the energy. And so it's just this trade-off between how big is the technology and how far away is it.
Yeah.
So to go back to Earth, if I'm looking to see if there are animals on Earth, I might spot an elephant a long way away, or I might spot an ant right here. But if it doesn't happen to be an anthill here, it's not obvious whether I'm better off with binoculars or microscope. You don't necessarily know. So you got to use both. Depends on where you are.
So, but there are some efforts focused at.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
So take the Fermi paradox argument. They
Mhm.
should have filled the galaxy. So the pessimists' explanation is that if they existed, they would have by now occupied every system in the galaxy. Since they're not here, that means they're not anywhere. That means they don't exist and we're the first. I don't buy it, but that's the argument. But let's take that argument, which I don't buy. Say, okay, well, let's say that's it, and looking in the galaxy is pointless. Unless you think life is unique to the Milky Way, that it's not in any galaxy, then other galaxies should be endemic with life, right? That argument says the Milky Way is weirdly sterile, but many other galaxies have been completely filled. And if you're that kind of creature that just absolutely fills the galaxy, then there's going to be a bunch of Dyson spheres in that galaxy. Dyson spheres you can see a long way away. And so if a galaxy is filled with Dyson spheres, we would totally notice. So that's the way to do it extragalactic.
The other trick though is the distances. If you found something, I mean, the closest galaxies are.
Well, yeah, it's not contact.
Right.
You're just noticing, oh, there's
Something existed.
There's a tailpipe over there. It's very bright. They have a lot of technology over there, millions of light years away.
Right. And more importantly, that signal came from millions and millions of years.
And it came from millions of years ago.
So
So you're causally disconnected, you're separated. That's a very safe form of detection.
Yeah.
No one gets upset at the idea of contact with something millions of light years away. Because then all of our fears from sci-fi movies that we've trained that, if we make contact, they're going to eat us and nuke our cities or whatever they're going to do. Those don't arouse opposition. We find something around the nearest star, or we find something in a solar system, people are going to freak out. And that's actually why at that NASA workshop and in all of these conversations we have about post-detection protocols, we need to work better than we do with the sociologists and the anthropologists on how the world will react to the news. Many people think it will cause, chaos and all of this stuff, but frankly, a huge fraction of the planet thinks we've already made contact. If you ask, Area 51 or psychic connections or whatever, or what are UFOs?
The farmer that got, yeah.
I mean, like half the planet's willing to believe that we've already made contact. And so, the market hasn't crashed. It's been okay. So I think the worst case scenarios are completely overblown. Because the people who freak out the most already think it's happening. That not to say that we can dismiss it as a non-event. Bad things could happen, and we need to think about it.
There's a couple things popped up in the chat, but I'll throw something in real quick.
Yeah.
I've also heard the discussion that, and I'd be curious your read on it, and I'm sure I'll mungle the argument is for a group to have gotten to the technological level where they can reach out that far, they probably are not warmongers because and you know where I'm headed, and I'm struggling to find the right words.
Yeah, so Jill Tarter's argument is that in order to have lasted long enough for us to have any chance of detecting them, they have to have gotten over a lot of their short-term thinking, just self-destructive impulses. And there's definitely the argument that any species that's lasted that long will have necessarily be more morally advanced than we are, more sustainable. By definition, they must be sustainable.
Right.
I'm always very skeptical of any argument that says aliens are like X, because if you try that on humans, it always fails.
Right.
Humans are like X. Well, some are like,
Right.
like we are naturally curious and explore the universe. A very small number of people have explored the universe. Right.
Well, and I mean, the flip moralistic argument I use is when you're talking about giant leaps in intelligence, what regard do humans, the most moral human, what regard do they pay to an ant?
To an ant. Well, right. And so then there's this idea that if they're very old and technologically advanced, that means they're farther along some line of technology, and that, you know, behind us are the ants and ahead of us are them. And this harkens back to the way that we're taught to think about the world. There's this whole hierarchy of life, and it actually goes back to old religious arguments, you know, animals below humans, below the angels, below God. There's this whole thing that we don't even know that we're trained to think this way. And anthropologists, this is why it's good to talk to them, are really good at spotting that and saying, that's actually not how life works. That's not how intelligence works. That's not how technology works. That's not how human cultures work. And that when we think about primitive people that don't have our technology, we forget that they've had just as long to develop socially as we have. And they have very sophisticated societies that are just as sophisticated as ours. We just don't recognize it because we've been taught to value some things over others. And then there's the plurality. I mean, if you have a galaxy spanning species, there's going to be all these different subspecies and subcultures, and it's only the loud ones that you're going to notice. It's like, you know, you go to the African savannah and you notice the giraffes because they're big and obvious, and you miss, you know,
The termites.
the termites and the 90 species of bugs that you just rolled right past and didn't even notice they were there. And in fact, their collective intelligence might be even higher. So it's very, it's important to talk to the anthropologists on this and get out of that mindset and make sure that we're not predicating our searches on those false assumptions that are based on false descriptions of humans.
Yeah. I think a couple of comments popped.
Someone wanted to ask if I was going to talk about Dyson spheres. The answer was yes.
The viability of them.
That's right. The viability, they're not viable.
Yeah.
I mean, the Dyson sphere is a swarm of gnats. That's totally viable. There's no reason you can't do that. But the shell doesn't work. It would collapse. It'd be an arch the size of the galaxy or the solar system. And arches are under a lot of compressive pressure. And there's no substance that can survive that level of pressure, even with future tech. It's just impossible. Is it fair to say there's a lot of sky left to search? Oh, yes. There's a huge, yes. We've barely begun to look. There's a project at UC San Diego. Paul Horowitz is involved by Shelley Wright to basically look at all the sky all the time. It's like a quarter of the sky all the time, but it's close enough for laser flashes. And if that project runs for a couple years, then we will actually be able to say there are or are not laser flashes above a certain brightness in the sky communicating with us, which would be really interesting. That'll be the first time we've really ruled something out across the whole sky. The Breakthrough Listen project that Yuri Milner funds is helping us rule out continuous radio signals, just pointed at us. Here we are, here we are, here we are, around thousands and thousands of stars. And so we can rule out that particular thing that Frank was looking for in Project Osma. So they will basically finish the ambition of Project Osma. Are there loud radio beacons, narrow band in the microwave, pointed at Earth? So that's really cool to finally finish that project. It'll be great.
A couple of years ago, I remember reading that Betelgeuse was dimming.
Dimming, yeah.
Yeah, kind of strangely. That was that found to be due to cosmic dust?
Yeah, so Betelgeuse is a supergiant star, and supergiant stars, their atmospheres are barely held on. I mean, the reason they're big is because the atmospheres are very far. And so when they're that far away, they're very tenuous. They can form dust if they get a little chilly, and they just have big weather systems basically out there. And so it's not uncommon for a supergiant to just develop a big dust cloud in its atmosphere and get a lot dimmer for a little while. And that's apparently what it did. It's always fluttered around, but for some reason this time it got dimmer than usual, and it attracted a lot of attention because supergiant stars end their lives as supernovae. And principles, Betelgeuse could go off anytime. I mean, it's probably got a few million years left, but we don't know. And so when it does something weird like that, everyone's like, oh, is it going to blow up? it won't let us know if it's gonna blow up. The surface doesn't know anything about what's going on in the core. So it's not gonna give us a nice warning like that, I'm afraid. But it was fun to watch it. There's a Twitter bot that announces called like Beetlejuice or something, and it just announces how dim it is every day, so that you can keep track on Twitter. Mhm.
Well, I've been in amateur radio for a while, electronics, and a radio that was made in the 1930s is this big clunky thing with tubes, and it gives off
Yeah.
a lot of energy. It's
Yeah.
not very efficient. And nowadays, that same radio can be actually on one silicon chip. And
That's
very
right.
efficient. Okay.
Yeah.
So you would think as a civilization, it advances, its use of energy will become
Sure.
more and more efficient. So why would
Yeah.
an advanced
Yeah.
civilization radiate all this stuff into space and not
Yeah.
actually be able to capture it and use it? And
Gotcha.
so we've, as you advance, you go past this point of
Right, where you would
throwing
waste
all
all
this
that
garbage
energy.
out.
I
Yeah,
hear ya.
and you're no longer putting it out to be detected the way you're thinking how SETI's working now, how
I
it's trying
gotcha.
to detect it.
So there's two answers. One is this issue of efficiency. So there's how efficiently you use the energy, and then there's why would you throw it away? You have to throw it away because you can't keep it. Like once you use energy up, you really have to dump it. Efficiency isn't about whether you can keep the energy and not waste it when you're done. You have to have an exhaust pipe. The question is, how much can you do with your energy before you throw it away, right? How efficient are you at eking out every bit of utility you can out of the energy? And as you point out, radios, but computers, think of a computer. Think about how much energy, like, ENIAC or MANIAC, or these early computers use compared to this computer.
Right.
And this computer is much more efficient. But now think about how much energy computers use today versus the 60s. We use way more energy on computers today, even though they're more efficient. So just because they're more efficient doesn't mean we use less energy. It just means for every bit of energy, we get more out of it.
But if you leak it out
And
at
you-
such a slow rate,
No,
because
no.
you're so efficient.
You can't, no, it's confusing the two things. Efficiency is for an erg, how many cycles do I get? And that we're extremely efficient. And so if this computer only worked at the level of those early 1960s computers, it would leak out energy so slow, like you wouldn't even know it was on. But you'd also only be doing, thousands of calculations a second or something like that. So we are much more efficient and we use way more energy because we just run as many cycles as we can. And so the bottom line is every erg that you take to do energy with, you have to give that full erg out as heat. There's no way around it. That's fundamental thermodynamics. And that's separate from the question of efficiency, which is how much do I do with each erg? And in fact, making computers more efficient just helps us get even more out of them. So it's kind of a subtle argument, but it's fundamental. Just think conservation of energy.
Yeah.
You have to get rid of your waste heat when you're done. And if you have an efficient computer, that's just even more incentive to use more energy because you get even more cycles out. It kind of is a feedback loop that the more efficient you are, the bigger the computer you are.
It's kind of like as cars get safer and safer, people just drive more recklessly.
Oh, maybe, yeah, I guess
That's only
so.
you, Jeff.
I noticed there was a hand up on does the Sid have, I saw Sid might have.
Yeah. Can you hear me, John?
Yeah,
Jason?
we can hear you.
It's more like because on the movie in the movie Contact, they were able to detect the aliens from the radio, and like they were able to get the information from the speaker, that's in the ordinary speaker,
Right.
which makes me kind of curious why, as to why SETI, maybe you can comment, as to why SETI still uses radio or detection of a radio signal as a measure when you're communicating via radio. It's pretty much the modulation of a signal carrier. And if you do not have or if you don't know the proper modulation on the other end, it'll be hard to interpret information. If you can comment on that, please.
Sure. So there's two separate problems. One is there a signal? And the second problem is, can I decode it? So Contact, because it's a science fiction story and sort of a best case scenario, they detect it, and then within, in the same scene they've detected it, they've decoded it because it turns out to be encoded according to the way we do television. Because they know that's what we do. And so that's what they send us because they want us to decode it. So decoding it in reality would probably be very, very hard. And my analogy might be if you gave Thomas Edison a fiber optic cable. He's a very clever guy. And if you said like, Wikipedia is on here with all the information you want, it's all sitting there in this fiber optic cable, go. He was very clever. He could probably tell that there was light coming through the fiber. And I don't think he could have told that it was being modulated because it's just too fast and he didn't have fast electronics. But even today, if you gave someone a fiber optic cable and they didn't understand the modulation, they might never be able to decode what it was if it was some weird modulation. And even if they could tell there were bits in there and count the ones and zeros, it would just be, if it's encrypted, then there's something, right? There's nothing you can do. So the problem of detecting the radio signal is very different from decoding it. And what they're trying to do with the radio SETI projects is just detect it. Just see if there's something there. And then once you've detected it, then you can worry about whether it might be able to be decoded, which will take a lot longer and be a lot harder. So that's the answer. We can, in fact, they detect radio signals they can't decode all the time. In fact, almost everything they see is radio frequency interference from transmitters that they don't know what the transmitters are. They could probably try to decode it, but maybe with a lot of work, they get the zeros and ones, but then it's all encrypted, so they don't know anyway. So I think that's what it'll be like. It'll just be so faint. So they can detect a signal so faint you can't decode it. And that's still useful and interesting. Just with your telescope.
Something else popping in the chat?
I think that's the
Jason?
same question.
Same one? Okay, cool.
So but to say that you have an intelligent signal, it has to have some kind of signature to say that it's not natural.
That's a good question.
So what
That's a good
is
question.
this parameters that are using?
So nature cannot produce a narrow carrier wave. It's impossible to naturally produce it. The argument's a little subtle, but the bottom line is Doppler shifts. So if something moves towards you and emits a radio wave, then the radio wave goes to higher frequency. When we send a signal, our transmitters are fixed on the surface of the Earth with the receivers. So the Earth is spinning, but the distance between them is constant because they're both fixed on the Earth. So we can safely transmit at 98.5, whatever that is here, and safely receive at exactly 98.5. It's fixed. But if you're out in space, the Earth is spinning around, and so that's gonna make things change. But more importantly, whatever is sending the signal is moving. And if that's a natural source, then we're talking about a gas cloud, or we're talking about electrons in a magnetic field. We're talking about things that are moving. The different parts of the gas cloud are moving, and the individual atoms in the gas cloud are moving. And the speed at which they're moving is large and random. And so when all those atoms give off the radio waves, they give off a big spread of frequencies. Right. And any natural source has to do that, because any natural source we can detect is a big gas cloud or electrons in a magnetic field. And they're big and they're moving in lots of directions. So there's no way to produce a narrow band signal naturally in space. And there's a very similar argument for laser pulses. There's some caveats to that, but you can always diagnose them. A very brief flash of light can only be produced by something small, because big things have a light travel time that smears that out. And so that has to be technological. So if you see radio signals in these data, the way they're looking for them, they absolutely have to be technology. You win without ambiguity as soon as you detect them. It's frequency compression or time compression. And that's how we communicate. In fact, that's how, when we communicate, we make sure our signals stand out against background noise. It's through frequency or time compression. And that's what distinguishes them as natural or artificial. Share thoughts on Oumuamua and Avi Loeb's books. I know Avi. Avi's been very supportive of the SETI Center, and I really appreciate the way that he has forced us all to have these big public conversations. I don't think there's any reason at all to think that Oumuamua, this interstellar comet that came through the solar system, Avi's a big proponent of the idea that it's an artificial object. I love the idea that we should be looking for artificial objects in the solar system. I love that Oumuamua gave us an opportunity to think about that and talk about how we would detect something that were artificial coming through the solar system. Anyone who knows the book Rendezvous with Rama, the Arthur Clarke book, Oumuamua is the first 2 chapters of that book. The first 2 chapters of the book really happened, basically. And then it did not turn out to be an alien spacecraft. Avi really pushes this idea. He's written a whole book about how it's an alien spacecraft, and I don't think it's justified.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Well, again,
All right,
Jason, thank you again. And oops, reminder, there are refreshments, so encourage people to hang out and enjoy some food and drink and company and all that stuff. Again, thank you to everybody online for joining us virtually.
Jason, thank you so much.
Oh,
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Yes, thank you. Excellent.
Cool.
Yeah, excellent.
Thank you.
Facility, thank you. Awesome. Yeah, and you'll do the magic, Rob, to keep
Yeah.
the video.
Stop the video.
Read any of that, have you?